Dear friends, English literature, romantic poetry, William Blake selected poems, short questions with answers. Short questions 28 to 33. Question 28. How does Blake portray the misery of the poor children in Holy Thursday in Songs of Experience? Answer. In Holy Thursday, Blake presents the suffering of the innocent children of England's charity schools. The children are very miserable. The patrons of the schools are insensitive to the children's pitiful conditions. Because of the indifference of the patrons to the children live in misery. The poet metaphorically says that the children's sun never shines to dispel their misery. The sun in the poem stands for the caring attitude of the patrons of the charity schools or of the country. The playground of the charity school does not provide any pleasant features for the children. The field is bare. It implies that nothing grows in the field. That is, the world of children is barren. Their paths of life are filled with thorns, which represents their misfortunes. They are doomed to live in eternal winter of neglect and plight. Winter is everlasting in their life. Winter symbolizes hopelessness. The everlasting winter in their life suggests that there is no hope of eliminating their misery. Thus, Blake expresses his bitter contempt against the superficial and pompous charity of the society towards the poor children. Question 29. What does Blake satirize in Holy Thursday in Songs of Experience? Answer. In Holy Thursday, Blake employs the technique of satire in the poem. The poet ridicules society and discounts England's credit as a prosperous land. In Blake's period, because of industrial revolution, England was materially progressing and many became rich and the rich became richer. Blake satirizes the rich patrons of the charity schools. They run charity schools to win the favor of God. They crave for God's blessings, but they are hollow and pitiless. They are insensitive and insincere towards children. They never try to eliminate the misery of children and even treat children as outcasts. In the poem, Blake also satirizes the ecclesiastic conventions of St. Paul's Cathedral, where the starving children are compelled to kneel and pray. Christianity trumpets the gospel of love and kindness, but the patrons of the charity schools are indifferent to the children. Thus, in the poem, Blake satirizes the callous attitude of the patrons of charity schools. He critiques the charity of the institutions responsible for helpless children. Question 30. Comment on Blake's criticism of society in Holy Thursday in Songs of Experience. Answer. In Holy Thursday, Blake criticizes England's inhabitants who neglect and treat the poor children insensitively. Though the land is abundant with continuous productivity and material progressions. In the poem, society is portrayed as being overwhelmed by the temptations of the landscape and ultimately have become corrupt. This is portrayed through the metaphor of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, as well as the repeated motif of religion in the court in a rich and fruitful land. It highlights society's obsession with material possessions and their lack of consideration for the resources provided to them. Society's neglect of the landscapes is clearly evident within the poem. The first line stresses, "Is this a holy thing to see?" The word holy can be perceived as a portrayal of how inhabitants are being sacrilegious to the landscape as they are neglecting and wasting the resources of the land. Stanza 3 refers to the sun does never shine and field bleak and bare, reinforcing how society has wasted the most valuable resources and how the landscape has been neglected because of this. The more the inhabitants take from the landscape, the more they want, and yet they have little consideration for the future generations, such as the children of the society who are already suffering. Thus, Blake portrays society as being greedy and selfish through his criticism of the inhabitants' behavior. Question 31. Comment on diction and tone of Holy Thursday in Songs of Experience. Answer. Holy Thursday consists of 4 quatrains. The first is a heroic quatrain, A, B, A, B, but the remaining 3 vary. The second stanza strikes discord by having no rhyme, A, B, C, D. Although there may be an intended slant rhyme for joy and poverty in their spelling. The last 2 follow A, B, C, B, a pattern. This irregularity contributes to the poem's tone of decay and confusion as the subject matter, the exploitation and neglect of children become clear to the reader. The tone of the poem is melancholy and fatalistic. The eternal winter in which the children live suggests that poverty is a state of death in nature, and that the true order of things is not to have children languishing in squalor and hunger. The children lack the sun and life-giving rain of summer and spring, and are thus doomed to this unnatural state by the machinations of a society that remembers them only to justify its own righteousness. Question 32. How does Blake portray duality of the landscape in Holy Thursday in Songs of Experience? Answer. The duality of the landscape is portrayed throughout the poem. The landscape can be a place of suffering, misery, and challenges, and can cause people to become tempted by its resources, resulting in the greed and corruption of its inhabitants. However, it can also be perceived as a symbol of innocence and of new beginnings, as well as the hope for the future, as portrayed in the last stanza. For wherever the sun does shine and where the rain does fall, babe can never hunger there. The last stanza juxtaposes to the rest of the poem, as it highlights that a natural landscape that provides so much shall find a way to support its inhabitants. The change of tone, evident in the last stanza, encourages the reader to hold an optimistic outlook on how the world can still be altered in order to benefit inhabitants if people are able to learn how to appreciate the landscape. It is able to establish a hope for change in the future through the alteration of inhabitants' morals and attitudes and their perceptions of the landscape. Question 33. How does Blake criticize social evils in London? Answer. London is a poem of social criticism. It depicts sordid and ugly condition of life. It presents a vivid critical picture of 18th century London. It begins with a general statement about the streets and the river Thames, about the miserable plight of the inhabitants of the city, London. In the poem, Blake attacks 3 great social evils: the callousness of or cruelty of the society, the adversity of war and lust. The chimney sweeper, the soldier, and the harlot are Blake's types of the oppressed characteristics victim. They all are victims of social injustice. The church gets a shock from the miseries of the chimney sweeper, but it is unable to do anything for the chimney sweeper. There is the soldier who sheds his blood in obedience of his king. Blake also records in the poem the tragedy of loveless, unhappy marriage, which compel man to go to prostitutes and beget illegitimate children. The children begotten illegally will have no future. The harlotry may also spread several diseases like AIDS. Nothing can be more realistic than this picture of London, and nothing can show the poet's resentment more effectively. Thank you friends for watching my video.